This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Detroit is the greatest! Straight up light you on fire for a Coney dog right now.
Darren McCarty comes back with Neiman in front of him. McCarty draws. McCarty in. McCarty! Let's go! Darren McCarty!
Stafford takes, throws, end zone, Calvin, touchdown, Detroit Lions!
Thanks, everyone, for downloading the latest edition of the Motor City Sports Rant. I am the Doc, John McEnroe. Jason Jarvie will be calling in shortly. We got a great podcast for you today. Jason is a big, huge Game of Thrones fan. I am not. The finale happened over the weekend, and I guess if everybody and their mama is watching the show, I will talk to Jason about it, get his sense of what he felt about the finale. I didn't watch any of it. I have not ever watched a scene. I'm one of those guys that will come out and say, I never watched Game of Thrones. I'm not going to hate you if you love the show or if you're one of those people that says, hey, I never watched the show. To each their own. I just don't think those type of shows really fit for me. I'm a guy that really is into dramas and things like that. I'm really right now binge watching Billions. I'm into now season 4, which is awesome. The news broke that season 5 has been greenlit, and so that show on Showtime is one that is catching my attention. And then for me, I would rather watch, college softball. I'd rather watch Michigan go down and defeat to James Madison than sit through and binge watch Game of Thrones. But I do want Jason to fill me in on what his thoughts were on the finale. And then on this podcast, I want to discuss with Jason what are his thoughts in regards to replay and things like that, because it seems like with recent decisions, especially at the Kentucky Derby, with football, obviously the hand pass that took place in the Stanley Cup playoffs, replay is definitely under the microscope, and I want to get a sense with Jason about the growing need for replay, because right now I think people are taking sides. You have those that say replay absolutely has to be there, and others say, look, it's making games way longer. The NFL now has added more reviews in terms of the ability to check out pass interference. So I want to get an understanding from Jason, is replay killing sports? And we'll talk about that right when Jason calls in. What up, sir? Good talking to you.
It's always great to be on my show. It's awesome. I love it.
Hey, whenever we get a chance, like I tell everybody, whenever I get a chance to talk to you, whenever it may be, look, you're busy, you got a growing family, it's all good, brother. Any opportunity, that's why podcasting is fun, is that, hey, sometimes my schedule is busy, sometimes your schedule is busy, but whenever we do get a chance to communicate, I know it will be fun, and people do respect and like the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. Now, you were among the millions and millions who check out Game of Thrones. Now, I'm in the other camp where I've never even seen a single scene of that show, but everyone's talking about it. We did a poll on our Twitter page at Detroit Podcast, the Two Bad Hombres show, the show where we talk about the things that are going on nationally and big news socially. The majority of people that voted were not happy with the finale. So I want to start this podcast with you talking about this. Why is Game of Thrones such a popular show? And did the final couple seasons really disappoint you, or did it live up to the hype? Because I'm reading online a vast array of opinions from those that say, oh my gosh, it was awesome, it tied into so many things, and I'm really sad it's gone, to others that were like, man, the writers mailed it in the last couple seasons, it was rushed, the finale was a big letdown along the lines of The Sopranos. So take me through in a couple minutes, what's this phenomenon that's Game of Thrones, and what did the final 2 seasons deliver for you?
So Game of Thrones, for all of you beginners out there, it is based off of a book series by George R.R. Martin. When it came out, it was this huge undertaking because the book, it jumps around to different perspectives. And at the time, I believe there were 5 of the books were completed. If not 5, 4 of them were completed. So, and it takes you, it's not just one point of view. There's so many different storylines. And I think that's what really initially got people, is that There's all these interesting characters, and the biggest thing is that it threw out conventional like TV and story book rules. Like, you figure that the good guys are always going to win, the bad guys are always going to lose, and that's what, like, in the first season, one of the main characters, who was really the main character for the entire first season, dies at the end of that season. They kill him off. He gets executed. Throughout the seasons, you get more and more of those types of moments. Like, there's just these huge battles. For any like Lord of the Rings fans, you're going to be a fan of Game of Thrones. So, getting into the later series or the later seasons of Game of Thrones, I do feel like the last 2 seasons were kind of rushed, and I think part of that is that the whole thing created by George R.R. Martin, he still hasn't actually finished the series. So what he did, he kind of gave an outline of how he's planning on finishing his book series to the producers of the TV show, and they essentially made their own story. So I think that's kind of where you might get some disconnects, that they try to relate some things from the books to the TV show, and these past 2 to 3 seasons, they were really, you're all new territory. So I'm not completely upset, and the only thing is that I feel like it was rushed, and especially this last season, it just felt like everything was on such a high pace that they were just trying to close up as much stuff as they could. I mean, I don't know if you want to get into this final episode and why people may be upset about it. You know, you go to the penultimate episode, the episode before this, where, spoiler alert, the presumed she's going to be the queen of this entire place, and she's supposedly the hero throughout the entire series, goes crazy and just kills a bunch of innocent people with her gigantic dragon, and just like burns an entire city, and sets her up to be the main villain now. But the only thing is there's only 1 episode left. So I think what people are upset about with this last episode is that there wasn't going to be a really good way for this to end, because I think you wanted the last episode to be just crazy things happening, but you just had crazy things happening in the episode before. So it would have felt way too rushed, and I think the way that they did it is the only way that they thematically could have actually did it. And I think the people that you actually do like in the story, some of them actually did get, decent endings, and, the bad people got what they deserved. So I'm not particularly happy with the ending of it, but I'm okay with that. I get it.
Okay, now, Jason, this show, similar to Sopranos, similar to Entourage, similar to big-time shows that a lot of people watch, really captivated an entire country. What about the show in the early couple seasons made it so that an entire country would sit around on a Sunday and really get into it and debate it and really take the ride up and down with the characters and with the show? What made it one of probably the last shows that's going to have a mass appeal nationally, so that so many people really got into it and wanted to talk about it?
If you want to be real easy about it, I mean, boobs and dragons. That's how it all started out. There's a bunch of nudity and a bunch of sex scenes in the beginning, and there's dragons. So it really caught those the whole nerd base with the dragons and boobs. But I think there's other people who, they saw Scandal, and it really was, outside of all like the battles, it was a lot of mind games and a lot of trying to backstabbing and undercutting, and that's what a lot of this series was. It wasn't just a bunch of fighting.
Did the finale tease at all the potential of another movie or another maybe spinoff or something like that people can maybe be hopeful of that could air in the future?
Well, there's already is in the works that they're going to do a prequel series, and that's going to take place probably well before this whole series took place. So, I mean, we're probably not going to see any overlap of characters, but there is the only tease. There's maybe a partial opening for one of the characters to have, their own series. But anything that they do past this is all going to be, there's not going to be any material that they're going to be drawing from. And I think, fans of the book series as well, they're going to be, looking for the last two books that are supposedly coming, and see what the differences are, and see what the authors, how he intended this story to end as to how the TV show ended.
Okay, now for me, I have been a subscriber of HBO, but not for Game of Thrones, for shows like Real Sports, for shows that are for the documentaries I really enjoy, and for the movies on Saturday nights and things like that. Now, for someone like me, I'm not into really the Marvel comics or DC. I'm not really into stuff like that. I'm not into dragons. My sister got the series from her family, from her husband's side of the family, so she got the series, and she gave it 3 or 4 episodes, and she tried to like it, but she didn't like it. My brother-in-law didn't like it, and we're kind of the same kind of people. We like shows kind of along the lines of The Sopranos, Billions, things like that, dramatical series. Do you think, knowing me, knowing what I like, what I find to be funny, what draws my interest, being that I'm a sports fan and more of a dramatic kind of, series kind of guy that I like to watch, would I like Game of Thrones? Should I invest 2 episodes? Because another host on the network, Putty, he's like, you know what? Don't knock it until you try it, and once you watch 2 or 3 episodes, you're going to be hooked. Do you think the doc would get hooked watching Game of Thrones, being that I've never seen a single scene? I have no idea what anybody's talking about other than the Khaleesi. That's about it. I know I've talked to you about that in the past because she's been epically nude in that show, but would I like that show? Would I like Game of Thrones?
I think if you actually gave it a sporting chance, you might like the show. But I think you can't just give it 2 episodes. I think you have to go the whole first season. I mean, and it's one thing when you're talking about like a regular cable television show. Like if you're like, I always like to bring it back to like Breaking Bad. Like I would love to go back and watch Breaking Bad again, but there's like 20 episodes each season and they're all hour long. Game of Thrones, there's only, up until, recent seasons, there was only 10 episodes in a season. They're usually an hour long. And you can really, in a weekend, you could really go through the entire season 1. And I would say I would give it through to season 2, because season 2, at the end of that, there's some crazy things that happen there. And you never know. You might not like it, but I think it's at least worth a watch for the cultural phenomenon.
What was your favorite season?
Man, I have a hard time saying full seasons because, some of the seasons did slog down, but I think I pick out key moments. And I think season 3, when it happened, like there was a huge battle that was a really cool part in the series. And another really cool part, I think it was 2 seasons ago, and it was like the Battle of the Bastards. And it was just these huge epic fight scenes. And it's just cool to watch, seeing them do all this, and how they're able to just, these are massive things that they're doing. And so it's hard to say an entire season, but I can only pick out points.
Now, in the second half of the podcast, I want to talk to Jason about replay. It's a subject that's been taking over the entire landscape of sports. Probably what lit the ignition was the fact that the Kentucky Derby was overturned based upon replay. And then in the Stanley Cup playoffs, there was an epically bad call from the officials, and one in which replay could not be utilized. So I want to talk to Jason about that in the second half of the podcast. But one more thing that the nerds are addressing, Jason, Robert Pattinson was named Batman, and it seemed like the internet was not happy. Now, I don't know any of his movies. I don't watch, like I said, DC or Marvel movies. What's the uproar about? Why are people tripping out? What's the uproar about Robert Pattinson being named Batman?
Obviously, I think there's probably things that's, more higher acclaimed moviegoers, they might argue. But the main argument is that Robert Pattinson was one of the main characters in the Twilight series. And that's what they're all going to say is this, he was in the Twilight series, he's a sparkly vampire. That's their main argument. But I actually like Robert Pattinson as an actor. I think he does some interesting things. And if he ends up being the new Batman, I'd be interested in seeing what he's going to do. I'm not going to complain. I think he's a better choice than Ben Affleck was when they announced him as the Batman. So I'm intrigued.
So he's got a good chance of being somebody that could actually, on screen, do a good job, and that people are just being a little bit too judgmental in their early reaction. They're being way too judgmental on this?
Yeah, I think, when Christian Bale was initially announced as the Batman, I think, he had so much he had such big actors to follow, and I think this is going to be it's going to be an interesting take on the Batman, because from what I've read about the actual story, is it's more of an early Batman, that it's not going to be the Batman where he has all these established villains and he's got all this crazy kung fu power. It's going to be him when he's just starting out and he's actually a detective, because what most people don't know, if you're not actually a huge Batman fan, is that one of the things, obviously he doesn't have powers, but he's supposed to be like the world's greatest detective. So I think we're going to see a little bit of that side of Batman in the story.
So Jason says, settle down, no big deal. Wait till the movie comes out. There's going to be nothing to worry about. Robert Pattinson could do a decent job, and he probably won't be as bad as Clooney or somebody else that played Batman that a lot of people weren't fond of, including Ben Affleck. Who was your favorite Batman? Who played it the best?
It's so tough, because part of me wants to say Christian Bale, just because those movies were so great. Like The Dark Knight, I feel was such a perfect movie. But I get skewed, because I think even more than him, Heath Ledger's Joker in that movie was the best villain I've ever seen in any superhero movie. So, I do like Christian Bale. Part of me goes back to Michael Keaton, though, in that 1989 Batman movie, because that was really the first Batman that I remember growing up as a kid. And I remember watching those movies and just being like, this is so cool.
Was that right? George Clooney did play Batman for a movie?
He did, yeah. It was, if you want to go back to the Adam West days, there was those days. I think that's classic Batman. But yeah, when Michael Keaton for 2 movies, Val Kilmer did 1 movie, I believe, and then George Clooney did 1. That was the Bat nipples and the Bat credit card.
All right, I want to tell you about one of the great sponsors of the network, Motor City Pawnbrokers. The Motor City Pawnbrokers are the one-stop pawn shop when you're in need of short-term cash or are looking for quality, brand-name new, and pre-owned merchandise, with locations in Detroit, Ferndale, Roseville, and Warren. Their mission is to deliver exceptional value. Now, if you're not familiar with how the pawn process works, it's really simple. You bring in your merchandise for a free appraisal. You come to an agreement on the loan amount. The Motor City Pawnbrokers agree to hold your merchandise for at least 3 months. Motor City Pawnbrokers only charges a 3% per month finance charge, which is a maximum APR of 36% for 12 months. You return within 90 days and pay back the loan with interest and get your merchandise back. You may also opt to return within 90 days, pay the finance charge on the loan, and renew the loan for another 90 days. Or you can elect to sell your merchandise outright. In that case, they will appraise your merchandise and offer you a fair price. Now, back in the day, people would say, oh, pawn shops are seedy, but Mark and the crew over there at the Motor City Pawnbrokers, they really value customer service, and that's why they're a family-owned business, a great family-owned business. For information regarding the Motor City Pawnbrokers, go check out MotorCityPawnbrokers.com. And if you happen to go into one of their 4 locations, tell them the Detroit Sports Podcast sent you. Now, Jason, I want to talk to you about replay, because in the latter part of the last month, it has been a topic that has been really debated heavily by a lot of people. You had those that really were upset and shocked by the overturned Kentucky Derby, that really affected a lot of people in terms of their bottom line. And then you had an egregious situation in which a call was epically wrong in the San Jose St. Louis series, in which, was it the Blues who actually used a hand pass to potentially get a goal in overtime that potentially screwed the Sharks and potentially could put the Blues in a good spot to be heading off to the Stanley Cup Finals. And then it was a situation in which none of the officials saw it, and then it's in overtime, and in the NHL, you can't overturn that. So a lot of people are debating it and are really upset in regards to the fact that, hey, what's going on with these officials. They sometimes really struggle to get the calls right. And right now, people are clamoring on one side to say, hey, any situation in which there's a potential challenge should be agreeable, and that probably is going to happen in the NHL. Or you have the other side that say, man, at this point in time, there's so many mistakes that literally any play in any sporting event can be replayed and could be added and looked at, because many people are in the camp of saying, hey, just get it right. But I'm also looking at it and saying, man, it's adding time to baseball games. It's adding time to football. We can't get excited whenever there's a play because of the fact that we got to check to see, was the call wrong? Is there going to be a replay? So in that sense, replay is affecting sports, but people are debating how much replay should be instituted in sports. At least for me, I would at least start with, hey, in critical moments, late in games, potentially game-ending plays or game-affecting plays, like in the NFC title game where a pass interference potentially happened, you look at it. But to look at play after play, game in and game out, I think that's probably way too expansive.
Yeah, I mean, I get a replay after every single play. It's not feasible, but they have to be able to fix these things. And I'm the biggest proponent of just get the call right. That's the biggest thing that I want. And I think the goal in that Sharks Blues series, that was something that should have been overturned, and that's something that needs to be fixed this offseason, at least for the NHL. And I mean, there's an easy solution to that, because I get that there's, there could be a penalty anywhere, but figure this out, NHL, for like just the way that they do it for the NFL, that they always review scoring plays. Just do the same for NHL. Maybe do it where it's like, hey, once they score, we have the guys back in Toronto look at the last 30 seconds right up until the goal, see if there's anything that there was a major issue. Because I think that would really solve things. It doesn't take long to take 30 seconds, look at the play. Unless it's a bang-bang, then you don't have to look at much. But this is, that would have solved that issue, because, I mean, it was a hand pass that directly led to them scoring the goal. And it was something that should have easily been overturned. And they just need to figure this out. They're like just hamstrung by these rules that, because nobody called it, though they can't overturn it.
Now, Jason, one of the plays that I remember was, that really got me excited watching sports was, I believe it was the Red Wings and the Blues, and, it was a game going back and forth, and it went, I think, to a couple overtimes, and Steve Yzerman crossed, in the neutral zone and blasted a shot, and it went in, and everybody was thrilled because I think it sent the Wings to the conference finals, and everybody was excited and things like that. And I jumped out of bed because it was so late at night, because the game kept going on and on and on, and the intrigue. And I think it was Game 7, and everybody was elated. And the bad news from that was Steve Yzerman hurt himself in that celebration. But imagine if he takes that wicked shot from far away, top corner, roofs it, and then we got to wait and see. I mean, we were all screaming. The Joe Louis Arena was erupting. Everybody was passionate about it. I get your point about, the replay should definitely take care of if it's right or wrong. But then, the drawback is we always got to sit and wait to determine if we can celebrate or not. And I just think that raw emotion sometimes is taken out with replay. And that's the toughest part. That's the biggest drawback.
It wouldn't ruin anything. I mean, if that's a clear play, that there's nothing wrong, then there's nothing wrong with that play. The only way that would, let's say that there was a guy who was offsides on that play. Let's say, whoever his line mate was, a skate too early than Steve Yzerman. Then that's as much as I would hate to overturn that, because that is, that's my team, but it's the right call. I mean, if that happened to us on the other side, I would want that to be absolutely called the right way.
See, that's the tough part, is that how much of the game should be replayed. I mean, I know you're talking about scoring plays in the NFL, NHL, but then do you look at it and say, like, you're happy that now the NFL instituted this pass interference rule? Are you okay with it, knowing that now pass interference plays can be included in the stuff that's replayed? Do you want umpires to go away? Because even over this last weekend, when the Tigers were dominated by the Athletics, there were some really bad calls by the umpires, and in terms of balls and strikes. And I think people are maybe even clamoring to start the discussion of removing umpires, because you can set up a system where a robot can call the balls and strikes, and they can kind of make the game a little bit easier for pitchers.
I'm just...
How much replay? How much replay is appropriate? Do you think that? I mean, obviously the trend is there's going to be more replay, but do you think that maybe there should be less replay and more emphasis on critical moments? Like, really, the best way to streamline it is the last 2 minutes, and including overtime of any contest, should be heavily looked at with replay, and the rest should be up to the umpires and the officials.
The way that I see it, have a set number of coaches challenges. Let them challenge the plays that are absolutely critical. Do away with the whole 2 minute warning thing. That you can, if you have your replays, you can call them whenever you want. So it would have done away with let's say the Saints Rams game. If he still had a replay in when the egregious pass interference happened, that would have been fixed. He would have been able to throw the flag. It would have been completely overturned, and maybe we're talking about a different ending to the NFL season last year.
Yeah, and definitely, probably we would maybe even had a chance for the Detroit Lions to have a playoff win when they were so egregiously screwed in Dallas, and a couple other games in the last couple years didn't go the Lions' way as well. That maybe replay could have gotten done. But I'm just fascinated by the whole concept of replay and the idea that, you know what, get it right, one thing, but at the same time, the pure love and entertainment and the situation where what factor is left for the human element? I mean, why do we need all these officials for if half the time they don't get it right? And then, a lot of times their calls are getting overturned. A lot of fans don't like the officials, the refs. And then now, you have these replays that are really showing and highlighting the fact that, man, these officials get a lot of calls wrong. And in the NBA, where's that going to go to now? I mean, is there going to be a situation where, for the NBA, they're just going to have a really bad foul not called so that we get that highlighted in the NBA as well. So it's just something to talk about in terms of there has to be that fine balance of allowing for human element, human error, and getting it right. And I do think that, having a certain number of challenges. I mean, in tennis, they put technology where the officials are able to see where the ball lands each and every play, and it's just so fascinating in regards to that you can call for a challenge, and then on the big screen it'll show where the tennis ball landed based upon the technology. It's so sick and fascinating, but we'll see where this goes. But in terms of sports, I wonder if it's going a little bit too far, because these games, I think what people and fans want is to kind of shorten the game, and these replays, no matter how fast or how many times you do it, still add 90 seconds to 150 seconds added on to a play where you go, ugh. And I was at Comerica Park where there were some plays that were called just for the sake of calling it, knowing already that the play was gonna not go in their favor, just to use up a challenge that they had, in that scenario where you say, oh, well, don't leave it in your chamber, just use it. So I just find that the replay system is starting to be expansive, and I think in the coming months, we'll see, how the fans relate to it. But I'm hearing both sides of the debate, and it's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out eventually across these leagues. Now, before we get out of here, Jason, I don't know, did you hear the news that the Lions are going to make an effort, and one of their big priorities is to restore their relationship with Calvin Johnson? For those that don't remember, when Calvin retired, the Detroit Lions said, "Give me Mike my money." And they said, "Give me back $2 million. We want it back, and write us a check," which obviously pissed off Calvin. He hasn't done a whole heck of a lot of public appearances representing the Detroit Lions. He's been seen donning Raiders gear and stuff like that. What could the Lions do? I mean, we all know that Calvin now is working towards potentially getting into the CBD and oil business and stuff like that, advocating for the use of THC type products for NFL athletes. He's ranting and raving and really a strong advocate for it, saying that it really helped him with his joints and inflammation and stuff like that. But, outside of maybe helping with that cause or anything like that, what could the Lions do? Maybe is it scratching a check to bring him back in the fold? And do you think the relationship will be repaired in the next year or two?
I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's me being a pessimist, but I'll always remember Calvin Johnson and the things that he did, and he was a great wide receiver. But I don't really care about that. I mean, does that make me a bad fan that I don't care if Calvin Johnson is, out here making public appearances? Because, he had all those stats. You associate Calvin Johnson with one of the worst periods of time in Detroit Lions history.
Oh, okay. So you're like, forget about it. I don't care if he's a fan of the Lions, not a fan of the Lions. Most people will say, you know what? It's good to have a guy like that potentially in the fold, should young wide receivers need some consult. He does, obviously have some talents that he could pass along, that it's better to have a guy like that in the fold than rather.
I mean, how do we know that he can pass that along? I mean, did he coach all these great wide receivers that we had on our team when he was on the Lions? Did he make any of those guys better? I mean, it seemed like we had to bring in a guy like Golden Tate, who was already established, to give us a legitimate second wide receiver. Up until that point, it was basically just Calvin Johnson and then whoever else could catch the ball.
You don't think he could drop some knowledge on Kenny Galladay to help him get a little bit more open? Maybe, how to make a couple more deep plays, how to watch film, how to be a better pro. I think that there's some value in having a relationship with Calvin Johnson. I just think that the tough part is I think he wants money. I think it was more along the lines of principle, like, hey, you paid me and I was, on bad teams a lot of years that they should have just waived the $2 million, but the Lions in the NFL is a business, so I think he took it too personally, and on that front, I'm not with him, but I do think that, when you're a billion-dollar corporation and you just make money and you're so profitable, cut the guy a check for $2 million, make promises that, hey, if CBD shops open up, at Ford Field, you got the first dibs on it, or we'll help maybe potentially with your causes and stuff like that. I don't think that, I feel like from the side of Calvin Johnson, by burning the bridge with the Lions, you're cutting out, potential for a lot of good opportunities. And I just think that, I know money, $2 million is nothing to laugh at and nothing to sneeze at, but I think if he thought about it long term, if he would have befriended the Lions, he could have probably made that and more with endorsements and other opportunities that he could have had.
I mean, I'm sure they'll figure it out because, the way it's going to go is that I think Calvin Johnson probably needs the Lions a little bit more than the Lions need Calvin Johnson, because I think a lot of fans do kind of think the way that I do, is that Calvin Johnson was this great wide receiver, but it didn't bring us anything. We didn't have any playoff wins. We didn't have any NFC North titles. If you in the Lions, I would say that they already have a receiver in the fold that I associate better memories with, and that's Herman Moore.
Okay.
Like when I think of Lions wide receiver, while I'll always think of Calvin Johnson, but the guy who I will say is the guy that I remember as like my wide receiver, it's Herman Moore.
Okay, what we learned today is Jason's cold-hearted. Bring me playoff wins, or I don't care about you.
Hey, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. Calvin Johnson, come back to the Lions. Do your thing. It's eventually going to happen. The same thing happened with Barry Sanders.
Yeah, I think.
It was the only team that he played for.
Yeah, I think they'll mend fences. Yep.
Yeah, sooner or later they'll be back, and they'll be kisses and hugs and shaking hands and yay football. We're all making money, and everybody's paying their hard-earned money to watch us play games.
You can follow Jason on Twitter at Jarvie the King. You can follow the network at Detroit Podcast. You can enjoy the fun banter when I ask ridiculous questions and Jason chimes in and goes, "Are you really asking that?" And I'm like, yeah, if I think it, I tweet it. That's the rule. And sometimes you'll see and enjoy the fun banter online. Get in the mix. If you've enjoyed or disagreed with anything that we've said, feel free, lob us a voicemail, 248-579-8686, 248-579-8686. It's available 24/7, or you can get in on the hottest sports debates online at Detroit Podcast. Jason, always enjoy the conversation. Episode 193 coming to a close. I always appreciate talking to you, sir. Motor City Sports Rant every Tuesday.
Later.
Okay, nice, idiot. You. Bye-bye.
Good day, sir. I said good day.
All right. Take care now. Bye-bye then.
Loser.